Hello, Survey of Literature Scholars. We're going to be looking at the signposts. I'm going to attempt to do a think aloud of Hillenbrand's Unbroken. Well, just a section of it. Remember that these reading writing signposts are helping us look at what does the text say, how is it composed, and what is the writer attempting to accomplish. And it breaks down our reading into 6 categories: conflicts, contrasts, and contradictions, change, consequence, and insight, tone, word choice, and style, facts, stats, and arguments, authors, sources, quotes, and target audience, and finally, emotional appeals and central questions. But today, we're going to focus on this first set: conflicts, contrasts, and contradictions. And there's more on these slides than what we'll normally use. But notice the 3 broad categories. The first one is looking at contrasts and contradictions. Anytime you're wondering something, ask yourself, is there a contrast here? The second is asking us to examine conflicts between people, characters, differing perspectives. There might be some paradox, or there might not. A common technique authors use to convey meaning through contrast is juxtaposition, placing 2 characters, 2 settings, 2 situations side by side. And you'll notice, artful choices of words are also used here to make comparisons. But we're going to focus on the conflicts, contrasts, and contradictions as we look at this section of Hillenbrand's Unbroken. The boy's name was Louis Silvi Zamperini, the son of Italian immigrants. He had come into the world in Olean, New York on January 26, 1917, 11 and a half pounds, a baby, under black hair as coarse as barbed wire. His father, Anthony, had been living on his own since age 14, first as a coal miner and boxer, then as a construction worker. His mother, Louise, was a petite, playful beauty, 16 at marriage and 18 when Louis was born. In their apartment, where only Italian was spoken, Louise and Anthony called their boy Toots. I don't know, one thing that I'm wondering about, this obviously is a different time period, but here's their second child, and she was 16 at marriage, 18 when the second child is born. Uh, really is a different time period. From the moment he could walk, Louis couldn't bear to be corralled. His siblings would recall him careening about, hurdling flora, fauna, and furniture. The instant Louise thumped him into a chair and told him to be still, he vanished. If she didn't have her squirming boy clutched in her hands, she usually had no idea where he was. In 1919, when 2-year-old Louis was down with pneumonia, he climbed out his bedroom window, descended one story, and went on a naked tear down the street, with a policeman chasing him and a crowd watching in amazement. Soon after, on a pediatrician's advice, Louise and Anthony decided to move their children to the warmer climes of California. Sometime after the train pulled out of Grand Central Station, Louis bolted, ran the length of the train, and leapt from the caboose. Standing with his frantic mother as the train rolled backward in search of the lost boy, Louis' older brother, Pete, spotted Louis strolling up the track in perfect serenity. Swept up in his mother's arms, Louis smiled. "I knew you'd come back," he said in Italian. And so here I'm noticing this contrast. Uh, the mother's name is Louise. Her son is named Louis. He has a brother an older brother. So we have just a little bit of contrast, and we also have some maybe establishment of character here. That Louis is bolting, he's running. Um, with pneumonia, then he's escaping the house. In California, Anthony landed a job as a railway electrician and bought a half-acre field on the edge of Torrance, population 1,800. He and Louise hammered up a one-room shack with no running water, an outhouse behind, a roof that leaked so badly that they had to keep buckets on their beds. With only hook latches for locks, Louise took to sitting by the front porch on an apple box with a rolling pin in her hand, ready to brain any prowlers who might threaten her children. There and at the Gramercy Avenue house where they settled a year later, Louise kept prowlers out, but couldn't keep Louis in hand. Contesting a foot race across a busy highway, he just missed getting broadsided by a jalopy. At 5, he started smoking, picking up discarded cigarette butts while walking to kindergarten. He began drinking one night when he was 8. He hid under the dinner table, snatched glasses of wine, drank them all, staggered outside, and fell into a rose bush. On one day, Louise discovered that Louis had impaled his leg on a bamboo beam. On another, she had to ask a neighbor to sew Louis' virtually severed toe back on. When Louis came home, drenched in oil after scaling an oil rig, diving into a sump pump well, and nearly drowning, took a gallon of turpentine and a lot of scrubbing before Anthony recognized his son again. Thrilled by the crashing of boundaries, Louis was untamable. As he grew into his uncommonly clever mind, mere feats of daring were no longer satisfying. In Torrance, a one-boy insurgency was born. If it was edible, Louis stole it. He skulked down alleys, a roll of lock-picking wire in his pocket. Housewives who stepped from their kitchens would return to find that their suppers had disappeared. Residents looking out their back windows might catch a glimpse of a long-legged boy dashing down the alley, a whole cake balanced on his hands. Let's look at contrasts and contradictions, conflicts in this next section. Louis was 20 months younger than his brother, who was everything he was not. So we have Louis and his older brother. Pete Zamperini was handsome, popular, impeccably groomed, polite to elders, and avuncular to juniors, silky smooth with girls, and blessed with such sound judgment that even when he was a child, his parents consulted him on difficult decisions. He ushered his mother into her seat at dinner, turned in at 7, and tucked his alarm clock under his pillow so as not to wake Louis, with whom he shared a bed. He rose at 2:30 to run a 3-hour paper route and deposited all of his earnings in the bank, which would swallow every penny when the Depression hit. He had a lovely singing voice and a gallant habit of carrying pins in his pant cuffs in case his dance partner's dress strap failed. He once saved a girl from drowning. Pete radiated a gentle but impressive authority that led everyone he met, even adults, to be swayed by his opinion. Even Louis, who made a religion out of heeding no one, did as Pete said. So, notice the description here that we have of the older brother, that he's handsome, popular, smooth with girls, blessed with sound judgment. He gets up early, he works hard, he once saved a girl from drowning. Louis idolized Pete, who watched over him and their younger sisters, Sylvia and Virginia, with paternal protectiveness. But Louis was eclipsed, and he never heard the end of it. Sylvia would recall her mother tearfully telling Louis how she wished he would be more like Pete. What made it more galling was that Pete's reputation was part myth. Though Pete earned grades little better than Louis's failing ones, his principal assumed that he was a straight A student. On the night of Torrance's church bell miracle, a well-directed flashlight would have revealed Pete's legs dangling from the tree alongside Louis's. And Louis wasn't always the only Zamperini boy who could be seen sprinting down the alley with food that had lately belonged to the neighbors. But it never occurred to anyone to suspect Pete of anything. Pete never got caught, said Sylvia. Louis always got caught. So from an early age, Louis is a terror. He's running, he's smoking, he's drinking, and then later he's compared to his brother Pete, who here we find out that they really aren't that different, but Pete never got caught, the sister says. Louis always got caught. Nothing about Louis fit with other kids. He was a puny boy, and in his first years in Torrance, his lungs were still compromised enough from the pneumonia that in picnic foot races, every girl in town could dust him. His features, which would later settle into pleasant collaboration, were growing at different rates, giving him a curious face that seemed designed by committee. His ears leaned sidelong off his head like holstered pistols, and above them waved a calamity of black hair that mortified him. He attacked it with his Aunt Margie's hot iron, hobbled it in a silk stocking every night, and slathered it with so much olive oil that flies trailed him to school. It did no good. And then there was his ethnicity. In Torrance in the early 1920s, Italians were held in such disdain that when the Zamparinis arrived, the neighbors petitioned the city council to keep them out. Louis, who knew only a smattering of English until he was in grade school, couldn't hide his pedigree. He survived kindergarten by keeping mum, but in first grade, when he blurted out "brute bastarde" at another kid, I may not have said that right, his teachers caught on. They compounded his misery by holding him back a grade. He was a marked boy. So unlike Pete, who has all sorts of manners, even carries pins in case of a dating emergency, a dancing emergency, I should say. Uh, Here we have young Louis getting in trouble for speaking Italian, for looking even Italian. And so there must have been a slight difference with maybe their complexion or their hair or whatever it was. But the older brother was considered handsome, and the younger brother, not so much. So we'll end there, looking at not only the physical comparisons, but also some of the emotional and other comparisons that really are driving at character.